So this is going to be my review of this mid-zone, or however you say that, valve cover for the N54. So I haven't seen a whole lot of people review these things in depth. I've seen some videos where people have put them on and given an update a little while later. Mainly the biggest thing I noticed was the valve cover gasket had compressed and they needed to tighten the bolts back down, but no one's gone in depth with the review, especially with this area right here. So this is a 4-piece valve cover. You've got your main piece, you've got this top PCV system that comes apart in 2 pieces, and then you have this side piece, which is also part of the PCV system. So initial impressions were, it looked pretty good. The paint finish is not that great, but it's okay. There's nothing crazy. It's a valve cover. It looks okay if you look at it for a couple seconds and look away, but you can definitely tell they didn't prep it very much, which is fine. So the gaskets on this, the main valve cover gasket, it seems like it's a BMW type, which I think is trash. I wish there was a Vitten valve cover for it, or valve cover gasket. If someone knows about that, please let me know a part number or where I can find one, because they all just seem to be garbage. And the one that comes with this seems like it's made of the same thing. So the gaskets that seal these components, they seem to be pretty well made. The channels they go into seem to be very well finished. If you look at this cap, right, this is one of the main things I was looking at. There is a piece of plastic sticking up, right? So quality assurance is not very great on this. Don't know how well this would seal, but that would at the very minimum need to be removed, right? And as you dig further into the finish of the metal on this, right, there's some, I don't know how well you can see that, but there's some slag inside there that I would definitely remove. I've already removed some of the slag from these areas right here, these uprights. See if I can get that to focus. And then, yeah, across all these uprights, they're pretty jagged. Let's see if there's anything I haven't hit. Actually, you can see a piece of slag. See if I can zoom in on this. There's a piece of slag hanging off there. I've already hit a few pieces of slag with my little grinder. I'm just using a Dremel with a little carbide tip, right? Something like that to get into the little nooks and crannies. And it works pretty well. So typically you have anything that's metal, it's manufactured, they'll have some slag on them, like an actual head from an engine or a valve cover if it's metal. It's not too much to worry about because car companies, they're making sure that the very flimsy slag is already off, and anything that's left is solid, has a very solid foundation to it. It's not coming off, they'll just leave it. This is not a big car manufacturer, right? So I'm kind of worried with some of the voids and some of the finish that I see on this, that those things are definitely going to come off if I don't hit them. So definitely inspect this thing for slag everywhere, the entire thing. So I'm going to take this piece off. This little screw I just put in there to hold it on. I've already taken this whole system apart and inspected it. I've already ground some slag off. You can kind of see in there. Well, let's see if I can focus in on this. I'm taking that slag off. Little bits and pieces, kind of the attachments. I've hit every single one of these little attachment points with the grinder to just get loose slag off. But you could really see, and I'll probably clean up this little area on the edge as well. It's not too well finished, but it really doesn't matter because it seals on that lip. I might grind a little bit off of that to make it smooth, but you could really see the slag. That little tiny piece you can see kind of sticking up, that's not slag, that's a solid piece that I'm just going to let go. I may grind it down smooth, but it's not coming off. As far as the channels on this thing, right, these gaskets right here, the ones that I talked about, they seem like the channels are very well made. They're very good as far as their finish. And these gaskets seem very well formed, right? So you can kind of see the channels are very well made on this thing. I'll grind some of the slag off on these points here as well. The gaskets, even though they seem really, really well made, and they fit very well into all these channels, the problem that I have, and this is me in my mind, is seeing the reviews for the other valve covers where the main valve cover gasket would compress and would not rebound, and so they had to re-torque the valve cover bolts. So that tells me that it doesn't have the bounce back, right, the memory, I guess. And I'm assuming that these gaskets and all these channels are the same material. So while they may seem very well formed, and it's really a shame that I'm not going to use them, what I'm going to use instead is just RTV. And what I'm going to do for that is I'll show you what I've got here. See if I can focus in on this. I've got this cap for the RTV tube, right? And so what I'm going to do is I've got this angle so I can get focus, and I have cut the edges away, right, and made my own little kind of groove for it to sit in, and then cut away on the bottom, cut away on the top, kind of like when you install a windshield, right? You have that notch, so it has a very fine raised edge. So what that's going to allow me to do is to very cleanly guide this cap right in here, and those edges are going to keep it from going back and forth. You see how it's kind of staying in there, and it's not losing that channel, and then that top piece is really going to allow for a high raised point to make contact with this other piece as I put it back on. All right, so main thing for me is I'm not going to use the gaskets, even though they seem like they're really nice pieces, formed really well. The channels are formed very well. I like that a lot. Now I'll move on to this piece, right? So it's the other part of the PCV system. They've got these plastic little pieces that are adhered in here with some kind of epoxy. I'm assuming they're heat resistant. Like, I guess this company, right, Mitsoni, whatever you call it, they've made a ton of valve covers that are plastic in the past, and people have great results with them. So I'm assuming that this is going to be heat resistant. Also, wouldn't be putting it on here, so they've got some experience, right? It's got another gasket, a really, really good looking gasket, except for that little tiny piece kind of on the corner, which they didn't cut away. It's fine. If you wanted to reuse it, you just cut away. I'm also going to pull this one off and use RTV, right? And if you look further in here, you can see some slag kind of on these little vortex, I guess, generators, cyclonic generators, whatever you want to call them, like the built-in catch cans, essentially what they have, which is a really good system that BMW came up with, I think, as far as PCV systems go. Unfortunately, their valve cover is not serviceable, so when it gets filled up with gunk, you just have to get a new valve cover because the pressure starts to go elsewhere. It stays in the block, or it goes elsewhere out the seal, start to get leaks because of the really bad gasket material that BMW used at the time. So I'm going to be hitting all of these areas. Everything that I see, I'm going to hit with the little carbide bit and clean those up. Now, another thing that I noticed with the gaskets, and I don't know if you can see this, but you can see where the gasket actually mated around the edge. See, it's pretty wide right there, right? Little light spots on left and right, and it goes around right this way. I can see where it made contact. Then let's come through here. If I can pick it up, you see it gets really thin right there. It's thick down here. Goes along, it gets very, very, very thin right here on this corner. It gets really fat up here. So what that tells me is that there is a gap here. All right, it's not perfectly flat on the surfaces, which I kind of expect is a cast piece. And these pieces right here are not milled right? They're not CNC milled at the end to make sure these are all mated up. I'll see if this has a gap, just putting it on here. And yeah, there's a gap right there, even though I'm holding it on there. So metal, making contact with metal right there. Boom, it's flat. See it? There's a gap right there. You can see that. Metal right there on that gap. Come around here. You can see the gap kind of widens. So really, for me, this calls for RTV to be used. As I said earlier, for that gasket, I'm also going to be using RTV for this gasket. So I'll put that down to the next one. Put this up on the desk. So here you can also see the pattern much better actually for the gasket. See, it's fat, kind of gets thinner right there. Come through, right, this area gets fat, gets really thin right there, which is really not good because that's got some curves on there. The flatter it is, if it gets thinner, it's okay, but the more curves you have, the more likely it is to leak. And then there's also like a really, really kind of thin spot here. Come through here, right? It's a little bit thin, but it seems to make pretty decent contact. But either way, I don't like the fact that it's not a solid seal all the way through. RTV is going to prevent that. Also, what I noticed, I haven't really looked at this piece, but I'm going to take these O-rings out. There's no air or anything that goes through there. That is just to seal it from allowing the air to come out. Really, if I put this, what was this, the other way, put this top piece down, now you can see the flat spot there, flat spot there. That basically just sits down on that area. Boom. And that O-ring is supposed to keep any air from coming out. I don't trust it. I just kind of notice it now. I don't trust it mainly because of this side piece right here. So let's look at the side piece. Side piece has, in my opinion, horrendous finishing. Finished by hand. You can see this is the worst one. It goes right through where the gasket made, so you can see where the gasket actually made it on there. Horrendous. So it's fat here and then kind of goes down into a little valley, gets thinner right there, it gets fatter, thinner, gets really fat on the ends, right? And then it does the same thing. It's actually pretty even on the bottom portion here, but this I'm not so worried about right here, this finishing. I'll show you that in a second because the underside is milled. Not worried about anything with that. What I do worry about is this. It's so bad. I don't see any gasket holding air in there after it's gone through a few cycles. So RTV will take up all that slack. Problem is, and I'll show you in a second, it's going to take a lot of RTV in a very specific application with a smaller amount over here and then a smaller amount on the end over here, because this whole piece right here, it bows up and then goes back down the ends, and I'll show you that. But these O-rings, right, I'm going to completely just fill that with RTV in the area around, because there's no possible way that these O-rings are going to seal this. And I'll show you why in a second. This also has another gasket, which is really well formed, really good gasket channel. I'm going to pull this out though, so you can see how bad this gap is. It actually, there's also, I noticed this, I took this off, a little piece of plastic. All right, if you're just putting this valve cover on and not doing anything, thinking it's just going to work, you've got a lot of problems that are probably going to come your way. So this needs some reworking, some fab work, some finishing on the user end to make it not fail, if it's even able to be fixed on your end. And I say that because every single one of these is probably a little bit different. There might be some that don't have the issues that I have. Maybe all of them, I don't know. But it's coming out of a place that doesn't have a whole lot of quality control. And take a look at this piece that I just put on here. Right? This is the side part. But you can see, it's metal to metal right here. Massive gap. Metal to metal here, right? Metal to metal. If I push this, you can see it take up that gap. Now, I don't know enough about pot metal, which is what this is. This is just cheap pot metal they threw in melted cast. I don't know if that got squished down and tightened, that the heat would like anneal it and keep it in that shape, or if it's just gonna have a memory basically spring back no matter how much heat you put into it. I have no idea. I don't know enough about pot metal. I don't know if a whole lot of people do, because it's just pot metal. It's kind of garbage metal. But big gap. So that's why I'm going to have to very strategically put a smaller layer of RTV on this end, and then make it thicker, and then make it thinner down on this side. Because if I just put the same amount, to be able to take out that massive gap, it is going to squish everywhere out of here and into the interior portion, which I don't want, because I don't want parts to just break off at some point. And so I'm going to have to be strategic about that. Also, with this massive gap, right, I was looking at these O-rings. So these O-rings are supposed to take up that space so no air gets in or out. But they don't even, it's not even a stop. Like, it doesn't stop, right? Because this is clearly metal and metal here. Clearly. So that means that those O-rings have not stopped it from making contact with the metal, which tells me that these O-rings are not making contact. So no matter how much you torque this down, tighten it down, and you're not going to be able to do it a whole lot because it is pot metal, it's very weak. You're not going to be able to make contact by pushing it down or tightening, cinching it down really with those screws. So you're always going to have a leak out of these. So I don't see these things, and these barely stick up out of this, right? They don't stick up very far, but it's just not doing anything. So ideally, I think this valve cover is made for someone who is going to plug their PCV ports on their head. That way this isn't even an issue, right? This isn't going to see anything, which kind of sucks, because for someone who's not doing that, this would be a really handy feature to have all of these parts that come off, and now you can service the PCV system. It's one of the biggest drawbacks of the N54 valve cover, is that it's a great system, really engineered by BMW, but you have to replace the valve cover. If it starts to get gunked up with a bunch of goo, extra varnish, things like that, it just doesn't work anymore. It causes all kinds of problems. So kind of trade-off, but you're not going to be able to use that. Now if you look in here, there's also, right, you don't take those apart, then you can just use it as is. Think again, look at that slag, right? Chance it's going to end up in your engine. There's some up here, and all these channels, it's probably going to end up somewhere else rather than staying on this valve cover. So you really need to take this entire system apart, deburr it, get all those things off. This brings me to the actual PCV valve. There's a standard cap, whatever, it fits. Got a bunch of gunk in there. It looks like they tried to use some glue or something. Not very strong glue, but just a very light glue. But listen to this. So I actually took this out and put it back in just for this video, but this PCV valve is garbage. I can blow in one side, I can blow it out the other side. Doesn't matter. It doesn't hold anything at all, which obviously it's not supposed to do. It's supposed to be a one-way check valve. So garbage, a little bit of slag up there as well. Just, you really got to inspect this thing everywhere if you're going to try to use this before you put it on your car, or else you're just, in my opinion, asking for problems down the road. But I do think that it is a viable option if you understand what needs to be done to make this an actual valve cover that works for you, and not have to pay $1,500 for a CNC metal. I'm sorry, I said valve cap before, but a valve cover, because you have $1,500 valve covers, which is just crazy. I understand there's a reason why they're so expensive, but it's an outrageous price in my opinion. Now, one last thing that I want to show you, which I'm not happy about. This might be like a deal breaker, honestly. I don't know if every single one of these is like this, because I have seen different prices. I've seen some as low as like, I think just over $100 to some vendor sites, which are like 250, maybe $300. I am positive that they all come from the same factory. Now what they may do is, because they all come from China and they're trying to sell things at the lowest possible cost, the ones from the vendors, and this happens, they might be better overall in quality, because that company charges slightly more for the tier 1 products that have no issues. They've gone over it with some extra QC and they pay a little bit more for that. And then they will continue to sell like the tier 2 or tier 3 or whatever system that they use, to sell the ones that didn't come out quite perfect. Because ultimately, to be able to have such dirt cheap prices, they can't have a whole lot of waste. And that's a way to keep selling these pieces that are not the best quality, and not have to just to eat the cost of that, right? So gonna have to remove slag. Right, you can tell this is milled. I don't know if I can catch that, but it is definitely milled on a machine afterwards to get this flat, which is good. So they realize that this pot metal warped and bent and all that, so they need to get this completely flat. But the left little edges on here, that has to be cleaned up. That's not a big deal. It's whatever. I can do that since I'm already doing all this other work to try to make this fit. I can fix that. The big possible deal breaker on this is coming along this whole thing, right? Milled, and then I come to this portion, right? So what happened was they made however many passes they need to get this milled. And then this corner, all right, they're like, yeah, screw it. That's enough passes, or maybe it was the max amount of passes they could do and still have this thing seat. But this thing raises up. This is not milled. You can see the discoloration, right? Right here is where the milling machine ended. And then also over here, it's not quite as defined, but it's very shiny from the milling process here. And then you get to this dark portion, and you can see where it's been sanded down. All right, this isn't as bad as the grinding marks that were on the top side. Not nearly as bad, but still, this is going to be an area that I'm going to put an extra little bit of sealant in, just a very small amount. I'm also going to put a straight edge on this to see how bad it is. But that could be a deal breaker, even if I do everything else. If that is not able to hold what I need it to hold, this whole thing is just garbage. So, in a nutshell, is it worth it? Time will tell. No, I do plan to do an update video on this thing after I get it installed. I was thinking about painting it, but I'm going to keep it silver just because that's going to allow me to see any leaks that possibly arise from putting this thing on. And I'll be able to see them pretty clearly. And then I'll document that and kind of put it out there. But I think this thing can work if it's gone through, disassembled, deburred. I would highly recommend using different gaskets because I don't trust the gasket material, and those gaps are just horrendous. You can see, if I put this on here, yeah, I already did that, but even just putting it on there, I mean, Jesus, that's horrible, right? That's metal on metal. And it's not even consistent, right? So let me push it towards metal. Gets really thick. Gets a little bit, it gets thicker. It's a little bit thinner. Gets thicker, thinner. So it's not even consistent with the gap. It's just huge, and I would say that is, man, a good 3 millimeters. Yeah, I would say a good 3 millimeters, at least a good 3 millimeters. That's just bad. So that can be concealed and fixed with RTV. It's not the best solution. It's not the optimal, but that's what I have to work with, and it is going to work 100%. It's just that underside, the milling, which will kind of let me know if this was worth it, because I'm going to go ahead with it, test it out. But yeah, I just want to get this initial review and initial impressions of this thing, since I haven't really seen anyone do it for these valve covers. They're all over the place. I've had this thing sitting for months. I've had a leaking valve cover, but finally about to start working on it, put it on, because I'm having a few issues that I think might be PCV related. So wanted to throw this out here before I start grinding and fixing everything, so people can know what they're getting into. And if they don't plan on taking it apart, I probably would not buy this thing. That's it. Let me know. And please, if you guys know of a Vitten valve cover gasket, please let me know. I'm tired of the ones that just turn to hard plastic after a while. That's it.